This program is brought to you by thepodcastfactory.com.
Ben Settle, compulsively punchable.
He's the kind of guy who you'd probably just punch on the arm really hard if you ever met him.
Worshipped by feminists.
He pokes fun at feminism and women, just joking around, his whole sandwich making thing.
Mildly inspiring.
Yes, I recommend the Ben Settle Show, and anybody who isn't on it, that's their own loss.
Somewhat authentic.
Ben is a very distinct personality. There's no fluff. I can't stand fluff.
Syrupy sweet.
Tells it like it is, and sometimes may not be the most polite manner, shall we say.
Kind of useful.
So I have spent tens of thousands of dollars on coaching and masterminds, and I've learned more from Ben Settle's podcast than from any of that.
Semi-intelligent.
Ben sounds like a crazy guy at times, but he's one of the smartest individuals in marketing I've ever met.
Mostly forgettable.
He's always in the forefront of my mind.
The BenSettle.com podcast begins now.
This is Ben Settle of the BenSettle.com podcast.
Boom.
And last week, boom, got it that time. So last week I said I was going to talk about always closing. So and in a way that you're not coming off as like pushy and all. Because a lot of people, Jonathan, a lot of people are very, very frightened, like timid little woodland creatures, like little rabbits. They get very scared at the thought of having to sell, and they don't want to look like they're selling. And, oh, my customers will get turned off if I try to sell them something. I have to like sneakily sell them something, hiding a link in a PS after ninja sales, hiding a link in the PS after 5 Goodwill emails went out first and all this. They do all this nonsense. They do cartwheels and play Twister with trying to not sell, which is just like, it does nobody any good. It's not doing them any good, that's for sure. And it's not doing their potential customers any good if they have something that they need to have. And so it is. So I'm going to try to rotor some of this out of their people like that listening out of their heads today. Look, I said this a couple weeks ago. I said, look, I'll take care of you, audience. I have you. Okay, I've got your back. I'll take it. Don't worry about it. All right, I've got your back. All right, I'm going to take care. I'm going to take real good care of you. All right, Pumpkin. I'm going to call the audience Pumpkin now, as I pat their head.
Pat them.
I've got you. I've got your
It's
back.
going to be okay.
I'm rubbing the small. I rub the small of their back. I've got your back. Don't worry about it. It's going to be okay. I got you. Just follow my lead. That's all you got to do. All you have to do
Stay close.
is follow my lead. Just stay close. Just stay close. Follow my lead. Don't stray. Don't try to get creative. Okay? You just follow what I'm doing, and it's all going to be okay. I promise. So anyway, a year ago, almost a year ago, not quite a year, but almost a year ago, I spoke at an event in Portland, Oregon. And by the way, when I say Oregon, people in Oregon they wince because you're not supposed to say it like that. The Midwestern way of Oregon is supposed to be like Oregon or some backwoods way of saying it. I say Oregon. That's just how I say it. Okay, and they just have to put up with it. I say a lot of other things wrong out here too, apparently. But the more they tell me that, Jonathan, the more I just keep doing whatever it is they say I shouldn't be doing.
You dig in.
I just double down on whatever it is. And so it is. But okay, so I was speaking in Portland, Oregon. And one of the other speakers is, my friend, I consider my friend Ryan Stewman, the hardcore closer. Remember Ryan? We had him on the old podcast.
Of course.
I mean, that was like the fastest 25 minutes. I mean, his stories were just like, oh my God, what this guy went through, prison and all that. Had to talk his way out of all kinds of trouble. Remember that part my favorite part of the story, not his favorite part probably, but just from from our point of view, is when he was supposed to get released. And he started talking shit to everyone on the way out. And he's like, I'm glad you got
you.
And then the guard said, well, we made a mistake. Actually, you're not leaving yet. He had to go back in there with them. Oh, man. I can't even imagine what he must have said to talk his way out of that. But anyway, so I met he was up there. And so we were picking him up at the airport. And somehow this conversation came up where he talked about some guy wanted to pick his brain. Now, Ryan he's not called the hardcore closer for nothing. He's always closing. This is something that he ingrains in, and this is where it kind of reminded me of all this stuff. Because I was starting to slack off on being a closer until this day a year ago when I heard him talk about this. When we were talking, we were in the airport, one of the restaurants in the airport up there, and he's talking about how some guy wanted to pick his brain. And so what he did is, I guess he goes, well, what's your email address to the guy or his text? And he told him. So Ryan sends him a PayPal invoice for his hourly fee.
Sweet.
And it's like, you're always closing. That's an example of you're always closing. He's not going to give away his hard-won knowledge for free, nor should he. And he let that person know it's for sale if they want to buy it, but, always be closing. And so I want to talk about a few different ideas for closing in the direct marketing world. And some of the stuff is it's all principle based, obviously, but it's also kind of philosophical and mindset based. See, a lot of closing, and from, at least in my experience, a lot of closing is not saying magic words that just, all that. It's like, I'm actually, in a lot of ways, I'm against a lot of that stuff, the tactical stuff. I'm not saying it doesn't work. And there's some people who can absolutely pull it off, and that's great. Good on them. Like the Brian Tracy's of the world and all that. But I'm very much from the Jim Camp school of selling, which is all principle based. And the closing begins at the very beginning. It doesn't come at the end. Like Jim Camp says, you don't go into the board of a company, of a Fortune 500 company, you go to the head of the board and close them. They decide whether or not they want to go forward with the deal. You're not closing them. You're not going to trick them into buying and all that. And I think we should take that same attitude with any customer. They don't have to be the chairman of the board. They could just be anybody on your list. They're all. I treat everyone the same when it comes. This is where the equality for me comes in, Jonathan. This is where I do the equality thing. Going back on equality, I just keep bringing all this equality stuff up the last week. As far as selling people and closing them, I treat them all the same. I really do. I could get away with the tactical stuff with certain people, but I'm not going to, because I don't want to bring them in that way. I want to bring them in the right way, my way, the way that I want them to come in. And so that's what we're going to talk about in this episode. So, for example, and this is an obvious one. Okay, I'm going to start with Captain Obvious. This is the Captain Obvious one first. And anybody who's been on my list, and certainly any email player subscribers, will be like, okay, Ben, yeah, I already know this, but I heard it, and you better have something better for me after this, or I'm going to turn off this podcast. And to them, I would say, go ahead and turn it off, Jonathan. I would say, go ahead, turn it off. What do I care? I don't even know you're listening. I don't care. So there you go. Nice. As far as I know, it's just you and me. I mean, you're the only one I know for a fact who's listening. So what do I care if someone I'm not in front of says I'm turning off and doing angry push-ups because they're mad at something I said? I say let them stew in their anger. It's okay. I will take their emotions and I will turn it into good. So go ahead and give me the emotions. It's okay. Anyway, I don't know where I'm going with that. But okay, so the first way to always be closing, Sir Jonathan, is to put a link in every email to buy something. Shocking. Yes, I know. I don't believe in this goodwill email nonsense and all that. I believe in putting a link in every email and saying there's something for sale here. That's the first close as far as email goes. That to me, that's the bare minimum. If you do nothing else, I say today, at least do that. And I know there's a lot of psychological resistance to this. There's a lot of people whose heads have been filled with a lot of nonsense from people who like to complicate everything. But your Uncle El Bembo knows this well. He's taught many, many, many people, including producer Jonathan, this. And I know that you would attest that this is the way to do it.
Amen.
And if they don't do it, Jonathan, at least they can't blame us for their lack of sales. That's all I can say. You can't blame me for this, okay, if you're not going to at least put a link in every email. If you're not going to put a link in every email, then you really don't deserve to make the sale that day, in my way of thinking. I mean, I don't know if maybe I'm out of line here, Jonathan. I don't know. But in my way of thinking, not only are you not going to make a sale because you didn't put a link in there to buy anything, but you don't deserve to get a sale for anything, passively or aggressively, okay? So, or abusively, as I would say to you, Jonathan, as you were the passive abusive producer. But a link in every, so that's how you're always closing an email. You're putting a link in it. You never close an email without some call to action. Now, maybe you're not actually selling something yet. Maybe you're, but you should have something for them to do or think about. Some link to click, ideally. Once in a great while, I'll break that rule, Jonathan. Like before I'm about to do a major like affiliate thing over a weekend, I'll send an email out warning them you're going to get a lot of emails. I mean, I probably don't put any link. I don't always put a link in that one. Sometimes I do. Sometimes I'll put a frivolous link to something, but something, because I would like them to buy something. And or at least have the opportunity to. I think you should be working your product and social proof naturally into every piece of marketing communication that you ever put out. Jonathan, to me, it's just like, I don't know if it's from reading so much Eugene Schwartz and ingraining this in my mind, this idea of interweaving. But to me, you should always be interweaving any type of credibility or social proof or something as much without forcing it. So for example, I'm thinking of last week, and I did this unconsciously, but now I think about it, it's very much something I just do as a matter of principle, but I had to think about it at first for many years until it became ingrained in me, which is why you want to start doing these things as early as possible and not put them off. But when we're talking about, I was like, yeah, I went away for 2 weeks. Remember I was talking about how I went away for 2 weeks and I let that girl come up with that conclusion to go back to New Zealand and all that.
Yeah.
And I said, I went away for 2 weeks. You remember to the email addiction and to speak at AWAI and Brian Kurtz's masterclass. I'm working in social proof right there. Now, I'm not doing it tactically. It's just a principle by which I do things. I'm always closing. I'm constantly closing in the sense that I'm building up credibility for myself so that when I do have something to sell, it's stored in the person's mind who heard it. And it's not like I'm just some guy off the street. I have some social proof going for me. And, I always work in email players whenever we're talking on here. Even though I'm not pitching email players directly, I mention it and I mention things about it. In a way, I'm constantly closing in that sense. I'm not keeping these things a secret. You could call it blatant self-promotion if you wish. That's not what I'm trying to do. But just as a matter of principle, I think you should always be building credibility for yourself whenever the opportunity arises. And I do this in emails. I do it during the podcast. I do it when I post stuff on Flakebook, whether in my group or wherever. It's just something I do. It's a natural part, a natural extension. I'm constantly closing in that sense. You could say I'm constantly selling. Well, maybe I'm selling you on the idea of why you should listen to me when I do have something to sell, which is closing before I even make the offer, if all that makes sense. I don't know, Jonathan, if I went over anyone's head on that, but as long as you and I understand it, that's the important thing.
I got you, baby.
Exactly. Another way to always be closing, and this is from the Jim Camp School, okay, is you're always creating vision of a problem for somebody. Always, but I mean, a lot of times, vision drives decisions. So for example, Jonathan, I once wrote an email talking about one of your podcast hosts, Doberman Dan of DobermanDan.com, Doberman Dan Gallipoot. He told many years ago, him and I have had many long Skype discussions. We don't do as much as we used to. I think we're both just too reclusive for that. But there was a time when we would, once every week or two, we'd have like a 4 or 5 hour Skype chat.
Wow.
And one time he was telling me, I know it's pretty crazy. And one time he was telling me about, I think I've told this story on my old podcast. I'm sure I have. But he told the story about, he was selling supplements and the bank, his merchant account decided to shut him down. He's too high risk. He had he didn't really have any chargebacks or any complaints. Just some banker decided he was high risk and they shut him down. Now, luckily, he had a backup merchant account. So he was able to go into his shopping cart and switch it to the backup one. And everything was fine for like another week. And then they shut him down. And then he's like, crap. So luckily he had a backup of his backup in place. And then he put that one on. And my whole point is this. That story will scare anybody who's relying on one merchant account. Okay, it puts a vision in your end of ultimately, I think this third one didn't get shut down, thankfully, but now he's more prepared for this kind of stuff. And he's got me thinking about this stuff, and all because he put that vision of a problem. Now, he could have sold me a merchant account. Like, if he was a salesman, he could have said, now I have a merchant account company that I can get you set up. And I would have bought on the spot without having to be so-called closed because the vision closed me. The vision of the problem is what closed me, not the magic phrase at the end of the talk. So that's another way to always be closing, is always be creating vision of a problem. Another thing and this is going to sound a little paradoxical, all right? I'm a paradoxical guy, Jonathan. It may sound a little bit of a contradiction, but I'm a walking contradiction. I'm the first to admit it, okay? The best way to close is to not try to close, in my experience. Now, there are some people that, it could be Ryan Stewman himself might disagree with me on this, and that's fine. I'm not really a hardcore salesman. I'm not going door to door and all that. But in our world of direct marketing, you are much better off having outcome independence. See, the problem with trying to force yourself to close everything, and people have these goals, like I have the sales quota and all this stuff. The problem with these quotas is it causes neediness. By their very nature, it causes people to do needy things because they need to get the sale. Once you need something, that means you're dependent on the outcome. But I say flip that around. Become outcome independent will make you more persuasive in general, which is something I talk about in my villains book to some degree. And that's what I'm saying. You only focus on the things you can control. You can't control, for example, Jonathan, even you and I. Okay, we cannot control how many people are going to click our links in an email. We have no control over that. None. If we have this goal, I need to get 60% click-through rate or whatever, you're dead in the water right there. To me, that is a back-asswards way of doing it. You're much better off focusing on writing better emails and becoming a better writer, a better copywriter and all that stuff, having a better bond with your list and doing things with your list so that they trust you more and that sort of thing. Focus on those things which you can control, which are your actions. You cannot control the outcomes. So saying I have to close 10 people, you've now put yourself in a position where you're going to come off as very needy to these 10 people. And you're going to have a harder time. I'm not saying there's some people who can do this. Granted, I'm not saying there are some hardcore salespeople who can do this kind of stuff, and that's fine. But for us regular humans, it is much better to focus on the things you can control, and then you automatically make yourself better at whatever it is you're trying to do. So I hope that makes sense. The best way to close is to be doing it before the close, by improving yourself, improving your offer, improving your email abilities, improving your copywriting, improving the bond you have with your list, improving your personal brand, improving the traffic you bring to your site, and making it so, putting some hoops up for people who opt in so that you're bringing them in with the right mindset of wanting to be a buyer. All these other things are you closing constantly. And then finally, and this, by the way, this is not an exhaustive list, Jonathan. It's just that I wanted to I'm just going over a few things. And when I started this new podcast, I didn't intend to get this deep into like how-to stuff, but once in a while I'm going to have to do this. I'm just going to do it regardless. The last thing I want to leave you with for this episode, at least, for always be closing. And this is the weirdest thing. Nobody would think any of the stuff I'm talking about here is closing. And this one's going to sound really like disconnected. But have a philosophy you really believe in, something that you live by and believe in, and just be behind it and never waver from it. So, for example, let's take Dr. Atkins, the late Dr. Atkins. The whole Atkins diet is like I don't know how many, I don't know if they're billions or hundreds of millions, whatever they do, because that guy never wavered. He had a philosophy, he believed it, and he kept touting it. The media was making fun of him, all the other doctors were making fun of him, everybody was mocking him and ridiculing him, but he stuck with it because he really believed in his thing, that it worked. And so it is. So he was closing sales by the very fact that he just believed in what he's doing. People want to follow someone who believes in something because most people don't believe in anything. They're walking around like Dan Kennedy says with their umbilical cord in their hand looking to plug it in somewhere. And so you be that person by having an actual philosophy by whatever it is you do. So for me, for example, I have many philosophies of doing business and email. So I have this philosophy of making everything simple and not complicated. And I believe and I live it. And I have my 10-minute workday philosophy that I just live by and believe in. I don't believe in having a big team. I don't want to have $250,000 a month in overhead just to keep the lights on. I have to make over $250,000. Like Talman Knutson told me he had to do it one time. He said his business was so bloated and big that just to keep the lights on and keep everyone paid, he had to do at least $250,000 a month in sales. Yikes. I don't want that kind of pressure. Personally. And this idea of principles versus tactics, it's something I really believe in and do. I don't just talk about it. The great Patrice O'Neill, who I've talked about a few times, he has this kings and queens theory of how men and women should behave. How he thinks that happiness comes from the king. If the king is happy, the kingdom's happy. But you can never make a queen happy constantly because, the way they would put it, they say if she has a vagina, that means her emotions are constantly changing. You can't control that. And if you try to chase that around and constantly try to appease that, you're dead in the water. How can you be happy? And if you're not happy, she's not happy, you have a much better chance of having a happy kingdom if the king is... Now, this is the Patrice O'Neill thing. People don't start yelling at me. I happen to agree with Patrice O'Neill, don't get me wrong. But this was his philosophy. And he helped tens of thousands of guys around the world get their balls back. And with the testimonials to prove it. So, but it's always, my whole point is having that philosophy, you're always closing. By virtue of you just being an example of people, they want whatever it is you're selling before you even tell you have something to sell. And it's the most amazing thing to witness. I don't know if you've ever had that happen to you or not, Jonathan, but trust me, when it's happened to me many times where I just put a product out and people buy it just because I'm putting it out. They don't even know if they need it or want it. It's just because I was closing by virtue of how I live my life and do business.
Yeah.
So in the end, doing these things means you're always closing. And if you're always closing, you're going to make more sales, period. End of discussion, exclamation point. And that's all I got. Next week, Jonathan, we're going to switch things up a little bit. I'm going to talk about how to create your own luck. Yes, you can. There's a scientific way to create your own luck. And I, your friend, El Bembo, will teach you how.
All right. Looking forward to it. So another bensettle.com podcast is in the can. We'll be back in your earbuds next week. Thanks for tuning in.
You've been listening to the bensettle.com podcast. To get your hands on a free issue of Ben Settle's prestigious $97 per month email player's newsletter, simply go to www.bensettle.com.
This is the podcastfactory.com.